Hello, this is Lisa with Unexplained America, and thank you all for joining me this week. Now, this week is the final installment on the Lindbergh baby case. This has been a big one, lots of information. If you have not listened, please go back and listen to part one and part two. It's just very detailed, lots of information going on, and super sad. So, just terribly sad case, but very interesting case and historical case. So, little business, please go follow me on the new Facebook business page, and you can follow me really anywhere: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere. And every time you like, comment here, leave a rating. But yes, everything that you do helps out the podcast. So we're going to get started. We're going to dive in. And again, where we left off in part two was when they were tracking kidnappers' money, and it led them to survey a home over in the Bronx area of New York. Now, they were led there because a gas station attendant named Walter Lyle, so he had actually received one of these bills. He just thought it was a counterfeit bill, and he wrote down the license plate number of the man that gave him the bill. And so this bill, license plate, registration led to a Bruno Richard Hauptmann's residence. And so all of the law enforcement were camped out there surveilling the apartment starting really on September 18th. And then the morning of September 19th, this man, kind of fitting the description of not only the gas station attendant, but also fitting the description from Dr. Condon of the kidnapper. So they arrest this man, figure out that yes, he is the Bruno Richard Hauptmann, and they initially arrest him for extortion. So he is arrested, he is put in jail, and they're holding him. And of course, they're investigating because this is all just happening so quickly. So, very quickly, they do have Dr. Condon come in. Remember that cab driver, the Joseph Perrone? So he had actually seen the kidnapper because he was the one that received the note that night. Like, I believe it was the 12th, whenever they were exchanging the notes and passing the notes to Dr. Condon to meet up with the kidnapper. So he, the Lyle, the Joseph Perrone, and Dr. Condon, so they are all asked to come in and do like a lineup and see if this man in custody is the actual person. And they do, like they confirm, yes, this appears to be the person. And I will say, I'll try to post, Hauptmann really looks exactly like, I wouldn't say exactly, but as close as possible to the sketches that came out from Dr. Condon, from the Joseph Perrone, the people that actually saw the kidnapper. So I think that's very interesting that he definitely fit this look. Okay. They have him in custody. Now, we're going to dive into Hauptmann, okay? And I'm going to call him Richard. So now, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, he is born November 26th of 1899, and he is born in Kornitz, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, in the German Empire. And so he is born in Germany. He is of German descent. He is like one of five children. Now he goes to school. He's the youngest child of five and is going to attend primary school there in Germany. And then after he completes his public school, he goes into a trade school. In fact, he does 1 year for carpentry work, but then he transferred and did another 2 years working on machines, like figuring how to do machine building. So he basically did trade school. He would say himself that he did not get a license per se, but he was trained on these, and that's what he worked in. Now, at the age of 11, he joins the Boy Scouts. So he was a Boy Scout. He does the schooling along with, and it looks like he was actually going to school and then doing the trade school at night. So very busy. They kept him very busy. Now, in 1917, and he would have been around 18 years old, his father dies. And then and this is in the midst of World War I. And so he has a brother, Herman, that is killed in France. So he's a soldier in World War I, and then he has another brother named Max that is killed in Russia. So very sad year time span for Richard. Now, Richard is put into the German army just like his older siblings have done, and he is put in the artillery battery 103rd Infantry Replacement Regiment. Now, in 1918, he is assigned to the 12th Machine Gun Company, and he is actually sent to France, and this is around August or September. Now, he fights in the Battle of the St. Michael, and he claims that he was gassed. So he's gassed, he passes out, but he avoided any type of injury. Now, he is struck in the helmet by shrapnel, which knocks him out and leaves him for dead. And this was about in October of 1918. Now, after the war, he gets out of the army, and he and a friend, they're working, he's working, and he and a friend, they actually rob two women that were transporting food, and they use a pistol to do so. Also, he gets kind of in trouble for this, and he comes out and he also burglars the mayor's home, and he uses a ladder to do this. They made a special note that he used a ladder to access the mayor's home. Now, he is put in prison for this situation for 3 years. So he gets out of prison around 1922. And then, kind of right after that, he is arrested again for suspicion of burglary. So he is pretty much, from the time he gets out of World War I and gets out of the army, he is pretty much in trouble for assault and burglary. Okay, so he is working as a criminal. So in 1923, around August or so, he illegally boards ocean liners trying to enter the United States illegally. So he is trying to flee all of his trouble in Germany and access America. Well, immediately in August 1923, they gets off the ship, they immediately arrest him and put him back on. He tries again, he fails, but he does make it into the United States in November of 1923. So he finally makes it in his third attempt of entering illegally. So he is an illegal immigrant at this point, and he goes into New York City. Now, there is a community of German immigrants in the city, and he finds his home country people, and they pretty much take him in. They house him, they hide him, and they get him work. So he is basically protected within this German community. Now, around this time, he does meet a young woman named Anna Schofler, and I'm probably saying that wrong, but she was also an immigrant from Germany. She had entered Germany kind of at the same time. She came in 1924. They meet each other, and they fall in love, and they get married by 1925. It is said that Richard was extremely secretive, that he kept a lot of things from Anna. He did not tell her things. He was kind of running around with some different women. He had a lot of acquaintances. He was kind of, it doesn't say if he was still burglaring, but it was implied that he was still kind of working with a criminal intent, doing everything he could to make money that maybe wasn't above board. But he was definitely a very quiet man, a very private man. And in fact, Anna did not even know that Bruno was his first name until he is arrested. So, and I will say he always used the name Richard. What we're going by here, and in the press, all they would call him is Bruno, which probably infuriated him because he never even used the name Bruno. But again, he was very private, very quiet, did not tell Anna a lot of things. He did not want her involved in his business at all. Now, the 1930 census shows Richard and Anna were renting a home on Needham in the Bronx, and it showed that he lived there with Anna and then 2 lodgers, and it shows that he was in building construction as far as his work, and it did not list Anna working at that time in 1930, so this was as of 1930, and it does show that they were married officially in 1926. Now, upon Richard's arrest, he is pretty stoic. In fact, the press and the police officers are going to call him Granite. He's just steely, he's composed, nothing seems to bother him. Now, Anna, she is beside herself. She is proclaiming his innocence, and in fact, he proclaims his innocence. He proclaims that he has never been to Hopewell, New Jersey, that he didn't even know the Lindberghs had a baby. Like, he proclaims that he had nothing to do with the kidnapping. Now, he says that he has this money, so his defense regarding this money, and we'll talk about how much money. Of course, he is shown to have, obviously given these certificates at the gas station. Other people come forward to show that he had paid for shoes, he had paid for different things with these gold certificates. Okay, so he is definitely tied to the money. So Richard states the reason why he has these gold certificates or this money at all is because of a man named Isidore Fish. Now, he says that he meets Isidore Fish in 1932. They become partners. Isidore is a fur trader, that they are working together on different deals, and they're friends and partners, and that Isidore is kind of staying with him. And then Isidore gets sick and he ends up going back to Germany in like 1933, and he ends up dying, by the way. So he dies in Germany. They didn't do an autopsy per se, but he was sick and he had tuberculosis. Now, he passes away, and of course now we're in 1934, and he's saying that Isidore, he had loaned Isidore so much money during their quote unquote partnership that when Isidore went to Germany, he leaves behind some things, a bag, and then he leaves behind like a box, a wooden box. Now, supposedly Richard doesn't touch the box until later on, about he's saying not until 1934, but then he finds in this box all these gold certificates, which these gold certificates were supposed to be turned into the government. So these are kind of quote unquote, it was kind of illegal to have these gold certificates still in your possession. I wouldn't say necessarily quote unquote illegal, but you were supposed to have turned these in. He's stating this is why he had all these monies, all kind of in this time frame. We're in September. They do a grand jury. They get a grand jury together, and they actually indict Bruno for the extortion, just the extortion, on September 26th. And at this time, so of course, Charles and Anne, they have, moved on with their life by any means, but this has been a couple years. They have a new baby. They were actually out in California when Richard is arrested. So they do fly in. They come in for the grand jury. Charles states that he does not wish to see this person that could be the murderer of his child, like at the grand jury. So he's like, no, I do not want to see this person. Do not bring him into the courtroom when I'm there. But everybody comes in for this grand jury, and they do agree to indict Richard for the extortion. So basically they're saying there is definitely enough evidence to support that you extorted this money. You have all these bills. So they're not buying the story of Isidore giving him this money. This all happens, and again, this is by September 26th. By October 10th, they had gotten the grand jury together again for the actual charge of kidnap and murder. And so by that time, the grand jury comes forward, and they do officially indict Richard for not only so he's already indicted for the extortion, but now he has the charges of extortion, kidnapping, and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. So he is officially indicted. Everything's going to move forward with a trial in New Jersey, okay? So this all happens by October of 1934. The evidence, so this is the case against Bruno. And I will say this, so because, I'm not an attorney. I don't have a law degree. You always hear, especially from defense people, about circumstantial evidence. They're like, this is just circumstantial evidence. So, the only evidence, quote unquote, that is not circumstantial, by the way, is direct testimony. So literally it would be someone saying they saw you in the act, or you are saying that you committed the act. That's direct evidence. Now, the only other quote unquote direct evidence is if there was an actual video of you committing the crime, the actual crime, the whole crime, if it was videoed or recorded somehow of the crime being committed. Those are the only things that are direct evidence, guys. Like, so when people say it's just circumstantial, DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, all of that is under the circumstantial evidence bucket, okay? Because basically, all that you can infer there is that, yes, my DNA was there. It doesn't mean that my DNA was there at the time that this person was killed or whatever. A lot of cases, like probably most cases, I don't even know the percentages. I can't even imagine, but it's very high. Most cases are purely circumstantial evidence. Okay. So when you hear this case is only circumstantial, that doesn't mean anything. Okay. That is basically smoke and mirrors, because yes. And the kicker is the circumstantial evidence is reliable, and there's so much of it that it can't be refuted. Okay, that's the thing. It's one thing if it's like, okay, one piece here, one piece, yes. But when they say circumstantial, most evidence is circumstantial, period, end period. So this definitely is like most cases and just based on circumstantial evidence, because there wasn't a person that came forward that saw Richard murder, kidnap the baby. Okay. And he never said, he is refuting. So he's saying he's innocent. So we're going to get into the actual evidence. We've talked about this. You have Dr. Condon, who did meet the kidnapper multiple times, put together the sketch even before, Richard was arrested, very much matches up. So you have Dr. Condon, you have the Joseph Perone, you have the Lyle, you have those things. You also have during the time frame of March. So Richard was working for a company called Great National Millwork and Lumber Company. Now, it states that he worked for this company about 10 days before the baby was taken. And then he does come back and work. So he was pretty much off. In fact, from the time frame of February 19th to March 7th, he was absent for a period of 17 days during this period. Okay. And I will say this, once the money, like on April 2nd, once the money transferred into his hands, he never worked again. Okay. And he would state that, and him and Anne were going on all kinds of trips. All of a sudden, they had tons of money. They do have a son born in 1933. So all of a sudden, these people that, on average, he was making like $100 a month, like before taxes, $100 a month, guys. All of a sudden, they are flush with money. He sends Anna to Germany. He sends her on, they take a trip themselves. They are flush with money, and he's not working. There is no work, no documentation of any type of work going on after April 2nd, period, to 1934 when he's arrested, by the way. And he is going to state that he was making money in the stock market. And I will say that was able to be refuted and shown that actually he was not good at stock market investing at all. In fact, he had lost money. I think the total was up to around 8,000 or so during that time period that he had actually lost, or more. So he was actually losing money. He never gained money in the stock market, but he does have all this money. And again, he didn't work for 17 days between the February when the baby is being taken, before the baby's being taken, during that whole time frame. He is not working his job, okay? These facts, these are able to be documented. They do have, of course, all the notes, and they have known letters and other documentation showing his handwriting. So part of the evidence is handwriting assessments, which all went to the FBI. And I will get into the experts on that. So they have the handwriting analysis, they have the FBI, and many experts lining up the kidnapper's notes to Richard's known handwriting, okay? So that's part of the evidence. Now, of course, the other evidence, when he is arrested for this charge, he actually has one of the $20 notes from the kidnapping money on him. Okay, so he actually has money on him. Now, in Richard's attic, the police are able to find material. So there is wood in his attic that is matching up. In fact, you can see where wood was taken, I should say, from the attic that matches wood on the ladder. So they are able to match up a rail of the ladder to a place in Richard's attic where the wood is missing, and it completely matches up. Like the grains match, everything matches up with the wood used for the ladder. And of course, we do know that Richard is a carpenter. He was trained in carpentry, he had worked in carpentry, is very much able to make a ladder. So those were what was lining up, the wood in his own attic. And I will say there were multiple pieces of wood and nail holes different that matched up with it. Like there were numerous things that matched up with the wood of the ladder that was left at the scene. Now, also what was matching were tools used that matched tool marks utilized to make the ladder. So not only the wood of the ladder, but tool marks and certain tools were matching up with it. Now, inside a closet in Richard's home, the address and telephone number of Dr. John F. Condon are found written on the wall. So, written on the wall in his home is Dr. Condon's information. His address and telephone number are written inside this closet. Okay. They find a gas can inside the garage of Richard, and it is filled with the gold certificates matching the Lindbergh kidnapping. So they find much more gold certificates still inside the home. In fact, they found $14,000 of the ransom money inside his garage. So he still had $14,000 of the money. And again, wood from his attic matches the kidnapper's ladder. His handwriting is matching the ransom notes. And of course, he has written inside his closet all of Dr. Condon's information. Then you have the witnesses who actually, Dr. Condon, Joseph Perrone, and then of course the Lyle. So this combination was the evidence. Now, Richard is assigned a defense attorney, an Edward J. Riley, and a C. Lloyd Fisher. Riley had tried around 2,000 cases. He was able to get 2,000. In fact, he was very good. He was very experienced defense attorney. He was definitely very good at his job. Now, the New Jersey Attorney General, he was the prosecutor, and his name was David Willens. And of course, he was also very good at his job as well. Now, they set the trial to be in Hunterdon County, which was not, they did move to a county that could accommodate the trial and accommodate, because they knew that it was going to be a huge deal. And of course it was. There were people, when the trial started, there were so many people lined up. They would just line up for days. The press were there. This was international news immediately whenever Hauptmann was arrested and then onto the trial. But the trial is set for January of 1935. So very quickly, as you can see, after he's officially indicted, they're gonna try him. And they do have to extradite. Of course, some people were kind of upset that he wasn't actually tried in New York, because obviously some of this was happening in New York. Of course, the baby was officially taken from New Jersey, which is why the trial ended up being in New Jersey. But as far as like the extortion portions everything that happened was in New York, as far as the money's changing hands and all of that. So there was kind of a back and forth, but New Jersey did have to get Richard extradited from New York, where he was arrested, where he lived and was arrested. So he is set for trial again. His family in Germany, he still has all of his family in Germany. He has his wife here. There are a lot of people that are kind of in his camp. He is not guilty, blah, blah. But again, we went over the list of evidence there. And yes, circumstantial evidence, but evidence. Other people are coming forward, many other people are coming forward saying that they saw his vehicle in the vicinity. And of course, he's saying that he was never in New Jersey, but people are seeing his vehicle is matching up with eyewitnesses. They have other people coming forward and saying that he actually sent letters, quote unquote, saying that he was going to do this crime, that, there was this whole side note situation going on, which wasn't put into court documents or anything, but he was writing letters to a guy that he had worked with in burglary, and that he was writing to him in jail and sending him a cryptic coded letter that stated that he was going to kidnap the Lindbergh baby. Tons of people coming forward to back up the arrest of Richard as well. Now, obviously, up until the point of Bruno being arrested, kind of the Lindbergh baby case had kind of fallen out of the newspapers, but once Bruno is arrested, this is front page news on every paper and up until the trial. So from the time of October to January, this is everywhere. And of course, the poor Lindberghs, they have to be present at the trial. Charles Lindbergh is actually going to go on the stand. So we're going to go over the actual prosecution. Now, the prosecution's case, it is a death penalty case. The charge against Richard is first-degree murder with death penalty on the table. And the prosecution basically is alleging that Richard broke into the Lindbergh home. He gets the baby out of the window, and then the injuries to the baby are from either Richard dropping the baby or somehow injuring the baby, deadly injuring the baby when he's actually getting the baby out of the home. That's what they're alleging happens, just with the baby's head injuries and so forth, and with the fact that the baby was obviously dead for a long time when the baby was found in May. So this is the prosecution's case, and again, it is a death penalty case. The trial begins on Thursday, January 3rd of 1935. Now, the prosecution, they call Charles Lindbergh himself, which he identifies Hauptmann's voice, because remember, he never officially meets the kidnapper, but he hears the voice. So that's what they have him on the stand for. So he actually has to testify. Now, they also call Dr. John Condon, of course, and go over everything that he's gone through, and he identifies Hauptmann based on sight and sound because he actually met him. They do also call Betty Gow because she is the last person, of course, to see baby Charlie alive. They also call an expert, a wood expert named Arthur Kohler. So he is called to the stand, and he explains the matching up of the kidnap ladder to the wood from Richard's attic. They also call 8 total handwriting experts. Now, these experts come from the FBI and different, specialized places, but they are an Albert Osborne, an E.W. Stein, an A.D. Osborne, a J.F. Terrell, a Herbert J. Walter, an H.E. Cassidy, a W.T. Souter, and they are all called to the stand, and they all go over the handwriting analysis and match up the handwriting from the kidnapper to Richard. Now, another person called on from prosecution is an Amanda Hauptmann. She was an 87-year-old, and she claimed to see Hauptmann near the scene of the home, around that day. There was a Cecilia Barr who was called. She worked for a theater, and she was a cashier who received some of the ransom bills, and she was able to match this up as well. Now, they called numerous police and law enforcement people to kind of who were involved in finding the money, being at the scene of the crime. And this would have been Lieutenant Finn was called, and of course, the others that had encountered eyewitnesses that had encountered Lyle, everyone that had encountered Bruno, the Joseph Barone, like all of these people would be called as witnesses and back up their testimonies and their evidence. Now, the defense this whole time is talking about how they're going to call so many different experts on the handwriting and different things to dispute the prosecutor's case. But they only end up calling around five total witnesses. So Richard himself, he testifies to his own innocence. And I will say, he is very stoic. He is very granite-like, but obviously they catch him kind of in multiple lies. And of course, his defense is that this Isidore Fisk is the one that gave him the money. Also, they're talking about, obviously, we pointed out the fact that he didn't work for those 17 days in February to March, and then he never worked again after April 2nd. Like, never again worked. He went on all these trips, paid for all these things. Where did this money come from? This is 1932 when this happened. And again, he only made $100 a month. But yet he was flush with cash, had all this money. He had they were able to document him losing all this money in the stock market. So he had no rebuttal for any of these things. And of course, they're catching him kind of in multiple lies. And it's very clear that he doesn't tell the truth. And of course, they're able to outline his past criminal history even before he got to America. So that was another thing. You have this criminal history. Yeah, they were able to outline all that. They do call Anna to the stand. They call a man named Luther Harding, who claims to see different people with a ladder, I guess. Like, they're trying to dispute the fact that there were other people with a ladder. There's a man called Elvert Karlstrom. He claims to see Hauptmann in New York, I guess, at the time of the kidnapping. And then a John Trindley is the only expert that they call regarding handwriting. So he's the only expert up against 8+ experts called by the prosecution as far as the handwriting goes. Now the trial starts on January 3rd. The trial is lengthy. You can actually watch parts of the trial. It's very interesting, like little news reels, little news clips. Again, this is very highly broadcast. The trial itself is packed with people. People everywhere wanted to see it. You have the Lindberghs there, just absolutely horrific. Of course, you have Richard's wife Anna there. It is a circus, but you can actually, I will link these clips, but there's just little newsreel clips that you can see, so you can actually see the people, the players in this. But very sad, Lindberghs are having to recount and see the evidence of the baby's sleeper, they're having to go through, of course, the autopsy report that we went through in part 2. So the trial goes on until February 13th. So on February 13th, the jury comes back with a verdict, and they find Richard guilty of murder in the first degree. And at this time, the sentence that they gave him was the death penalty, which at this time in New Jersey is the electric chair. That is how they executed their death penalty cases at that time. Now, right away, Richard's defense attorneys, of course, they're stating this is absolutely wrong, horrific. When the verdict is called, of course, everyone in the courtroom is relieved. The Lindberghs are relieved. Justice has been done. And then, of course, you have Anna, Richard's wife, horrified, just stricken by the thought of her husband's, going to be put to death. So you have joy, a lot of people praising this, a lot of people that are thrilled, of course, by this. It was the crime of the century. Richard had been pretty much vilified in the press and called a monster and called everything under the sun. He was pretty much guilty before he even began. So the guilty sentence was received, just celebration across the country, the world, that they got this person. Now, like I said, the defense, they are going to appeal. They state they're going to go to the highest court and appeal this, that he is absolutely innocent. Now, they do appeal, and on October 9th of 1935, the Supreme Court in the state of New Jersey, they uphold this lower court's verdict. So they do still fight and take this all the way to the United States Supreme Court, but officially, and this all happens very quickly. This doesn't happen as quickly now, but by December 9th of 1935, the Supreme Court in the country, they denied, and they do set up his execution date for January 17th of 1936. Anna, of course, she is still very much fighting this whole thing. He is still professing his innocence. He is offered, if you come forward with, if there was someone else involved, because they were still thinking, okay, was there someone else involved? Could he have had help? If you'll just tell us who helped you, or if whatever, you could go to a lesser sentence. So they are offering that, but he isn't balking. He is stating he is innocent, that he doesn't know of the crime, period. So of course, yeah, this is all moving forward with the death penalty. Now, there is a reprieve given, which pushes his execution date to February 17th. And then another reprieve is given to push the date out to March 30th. So now the new date is set up for April 3rd, and they're still trying to see if they can push it. So the governor of New Jersey is looking closely at the file. They're looking closely at the work done. And finally, there are no more pardons. There's no more push. Bruno is executed at 8:47 p.m. on April 3rd of 1936. And again, the whole time he does profess his innocence. His last words to his spiritual advisors is, "I am glad that my life in a world which has not understood me has ended. Soon I will be at home with my Lord, and as I love my Lord, so I am dying an innocent man. Should, however, my death serve for the purpose of abolishing capital punishment, such a punishment being arrived at only by circumstantial evidence, I feel that my death has not been in vain. I am at peace with God. I repeat that I protest my innocence of the crime for which I was convicted. However, I die with no malice or hatred in my heart. The love of Christ has filled my soul, and I am happy in God." So these were his final words shared through his reverends, which was a DJ Warner and a John Matheson. Again, this was huge news. They're talking about on the day, the whole thing leading up to this, they're talking about how he died. They're talking to his family in Germany. His mother is just absolutely sad. People are professing his innocence. And we'll kind of get into what the Lindberghs were doing. So this is April of 1936. Now, it says that his last meal, just because we kind of get into this and people sometimes ask, but was a main course of chicken, French fries, buttered peas, celery and olives and cherries on the side, had a dessert of cake, and then had coffee and milk as well. Now, other reports indicated that he had a salmon salad and corn fritters on top of all this. Now, as far as the state of New Jersey, this case is closed, but I will say Anna will fight the rest of her life for her husband's innocence, okay? So we talked about the 1930 census. I'm just going to go over kind of the rest of what I could actually discern of Anna, but in 1940, it does show that she is still living in the Bronx. It shows that she is working as an agent for the government in a coffee farm, actually. It does show that she's widowed and that she's 41 years old, and that their child that they had, his name is Manfred, he is 6. Now, in the 1950 census, they have now moved to Philadelphia. She is 52, he is 16. She is working as a clerk in a retail bakery at this time. And something interesting, it doesn't show that she's a widower, or widowed. It shows that she's separated. In fact, the census was marked that she was married, but then it was marked out and showed separated. So I don't know if she had gotten remarried and separated from someone else. I mean, her name was still Hauptmann. I will say some of the census just either put her name with two N's or one N at the end, but I could not find any more quote unquote information as far as census information on her or Manfred. And then I tried to look to see kind of if I could see what happened to their son, and I could not see it. And in fact, there was a Manfred Hauptmann that had like a find a grave account, and it literally says on it, not Richard or Bruno Richard's son. Like, I mean, it specifically said that because I guess a lot of people thought that this man was one and the same, but it's not. So he had passed away. Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, they made a point of saying that he was not one and the same. Now we kind of talked about Anna fighting for Richard's innocence kind of the whole time. So she fights the state of New Jersey, and this was in 1982. She is 82 years old, and she is fighting New Jersey. She's fought this whole time to kind of reopen Richard's case. So she at this point in 1982, she sues the state of New Jersey. She sues the police officers involved. She sues the Hearst newspapers that reported. She sues that former prosecutor, the David Willents. And then in 1983, after looking at all of this, the U.S. Supreme Court comes back and refuses to replace the judge. So she was asking for the judge to be replaced. They refused to replace it. And then they rule against all of her claims in 1984. So they're like, no, we're not going to reopen this case. You're not going to be able to sue these people. Like, we're not going to do this. Now, in 1990, because she's still fighting, this was in 84 that they refute her claims for suing. And in 1990, the governor of New Jersey, James Florio, he declines appeal to clear Hauptmann, period. And this was in 1990. And then I will say Anna, she does pass away in October of 1994. So she fights kind of her entire life for her husband's justice. And I will say there is a film that's done by Hollywood that comes out. There's going to be writers that come forward that are questioning Richard's innocence. So there are people questioning if he was really the person. Okay. So that's going on through the 70s and 80s. And of course, this is why she's fighting. So she does pass away in 1994, and I cannot see anything about her son, their son, like when he passed. So I do not know that. Now, after Hauptmann was executed, Anna did have him cremated, and there was a private ceremony, and it stated that 2,000 people gathered in Germany where his family was, where his mother was, and mourned there. So after the trial ends, and this is February of 35. So fast forward to the end of 35. Now on Sunday, December 22nd of 1935, Charles, Anne, and their second son, John, and he would have been 3 by this time. They are the only 3 passengers notated on the U.S. line freighter called the SS American. Now, they have gotten diplomatic passports. They are not under their real names, like they're not listed by the real names or anything, but basically they leave the United States kind of in the night. Nobody knows, under assumed names. They are headed to Europe, okay? They land in Britain. They end up renting a home called Longbarn in Sevenoaks, located in Kent. Okay, so they're in Britain. This is where they're landing. There are a few days that go by that people don't even realize that they've left. And then once they do, it hits the newspapers that they have left. A lot of people are voicing in opinions like, why did they leave? Questioning why they left or whatever. And of course, they left just, they felt like they couldn't live safely in the United States and they were fearful for their son, John. Okay. So this is why they left. And of course, we've already talked about how private an individual Charles is. They like their privacy. They were always kind of hiding out from the press. So, yeah, so basically they leave the United States. Now they are living there at Long Barn. In May of 1937, they have their third child. They have Land, and he is born over there. In 1938, they actually moved to this 4-acre island off of the coast of France. Okay, so they're relocating. They leave the Long Barn estate that they had rented during this period. So in 38 they leave. Now I will say he is still working. He is still a colonel for the United States as far as like the reserves and such, and he is still very actively working and is still writing. They're living their lives. They're just living it abroad. Now they do briefly visit the United States after Land is born in December of 37. They come back and visit, go, and then they return. Now, during this time, I have to say, this World War II has not broken out by any means, but it is pending. Like Hitler has been on the move since like the late kind of 20s, early 30s. Not, he's building steam in kind of the later 30s, but nothing has officially hit. The war hasn't officially started at this point, but there are signs to kind of give you guys some background. So the war officially, quote unquote, begins at the end of 1939 when Germany invades Poland. As you can see, they're there at kind of in the 30s, and people are leaving. Like people are leaving Europe. They can kind of see the writing on the wall, so to speak. The Lindberghs, they officially leave Europe and return to the United States in April of 1939. Obviously ahead, and literally the war breaks out in December. So they were only 6 months ahead of World War II. But they leave. They rent a seaside estate on Lloyd Neck, which is part of Long Island, New York. They are back in the United States now. So war breaks out. There is a general, Henry H. Arnold. He is chief of the U.S. Army Air Corps, and he wants Charles to help out. He wants him to return to active duty for the war and basically help them with planes, like to consult. Charles is very obviously mechanically gifted. He knows how to fly. He knows planes. He knows what works, what doesn't work. So he is just very gifted, and he wants him to come on. So he does like a 4-month tour with the Air Corps. Now, kind of leading up to this situation, Charles has repeatedly made, all kind of in the late 30s, early 40s, repeatedly discussing going up against the Germans. Basically, he has been anti-war movement, doesn't think that the United States needed to enter the war. He would say things like it's just the European war. We don't, just basically refuting our need to enter the war. He didn't think it was a good idea. And he's repeatedly made bigoted statements against, and this is going back in the 30s or whatever, kind of equally against Jewish people, against Asian people, people of any other color other than just white people. And he has made statements that made it clear of what he thought of other countries other than Germany, England, and France. So basically he would speak highly of the English, highly of the French, and highly of the German, but really not speak highly of any other nation. And he definitely didn't like Russia. Like absolutely against communism, against Russia, all of that. So he repeatedly was making these statements, these anti-war statements. And so at this time, of course he is still part of like the reserve. I mean, he is a colonel. He is repeatedly remained part of the U.S. Army reserves, okay? But he does resign his colonel's commission in April of 1941. The war started in Europe in 1939, but America did not enter the war, remember, until after we were hit at Pearl Harbor. So this was December 8th of 1941. So you've got this whole time frame of basically like there is fighting, there is World War II going on in Europe, and we are not entered the war ourselves, of course. And like I said, he was anti-war. He was very openly anti-war. But he resigns his colonel's commission in April, even before we enter the war, because President Roosevelt had questioned his loyalty to America. So because he's there, a lot of questions are going on. They're saying that he's in alignment with Germany. Even before in the late 30s, of course, he's over in Europe. He's going to Germany. He had accepted a medal. This was, and again, this is before war has broken out over there. And of course, he is not hidden the fact that he aligns with certain aspects of German, of the German people, of Hitler even during and again before war started. In fact, he is one of the first members of what is an American First Committee, which was a committee made of around 800,000 that was against the war. And again, making it clear he only liked certain European countries like Germany, France, and Britain. And again, all before 1941, before we entered the war at the end. Now, we enter the war. By January of 1942, Lindbergh actually wants back in the Army Air Forces, but he's blocked. So at this point, he goes from being the most famous, well-liked, the son of our nation to being like, people are thinking he's a bigot, anti-Semitic, war, not American. Like, he is not popular at all during this point, but he wants to go and help. He wants to help the United States in this war, but he is blocked. But he gets on with a private company to consult, and he helps actually with troubleshooting the planes being utilized by us, these B-24 planes, okay? So he is consulting, he is helping. This is in 42. So in 1944, he is working with a United Aircraft as a technician and as a rep, and he is studying these planes being used in what we call the Pacific Theater, which was that part of the war with Japan, the World War II part of what's going on. Now, in this time frame, it is said that whenever he goes, he's actually going out. He's not part of the United States Army or Air Force by any means, but he is going into action. He is being sent into the Pacific Theater action. And so he gets ready to go. He takes a New Testament, and he states that this New Testament is his favorite book. He had become very faithful. He had expressed that he wouldn't have made this choice to carry with him just one book, it being the New Testament or anything, like basically saying in the last 10 years, his faith has grown to the point where all he wants to do is read his Bible. So, and he took this just tiny New Testament. He didn't have a lot of space. He's going to be flying. He's going to be very, very busy in war. So he spends 6 months actually in that Pacific Theater. He is introducing, innovations with this new Lockheed P-38 plane. And he is impressing this General Douglas MacArthur, who's kind of over this. And he's impressing, like, he's working very hard. He is actually, in July of 44, he actually shoots down a Japanese observation plane himself. So he is kind of turning the page with his actions and such, giving, he's had just such a bad reputation during this short time of the war, with the late 30s and such. So he improves this General Douglas loves him. The pilots in the Marine and the Air Force are like, "Yes, thank you so much for everything that you're doing." So he pretty much kind of turns the page on his reputation during these actions during the war. Now, the war ends, and after the war, and kind of to go back a little way, so the Lindberghs are still having children, okay? So they have John that was born, right after Charlie went missing in 32. They have Land that's born in 37. They have a daughter named Anne that's born in 1940. They have a son named Scott that's born in 42. And then they have a daughter named Reeve in 1945. Just FYI. So they're still having children. And this is all like 40, 42, 45. This is during that war era, okay, during this era that we just discussed. Now, they are settled, the family is settled in Connecticut, and Charles is working as a consultant to the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, and he's also consulting with Pan America, the world airline. So he is working still just like he always did. He is very busy as far as politically. So he is sent. Okay, a lot of the world had no clue how bad Hitler was and everything that he was doing to the Jewish people, um, to the people, not just Jewish people, but other people, the Polish people, but they had no clue what was doing until the actual after the war. They're actually doing the trials, and all of this information is coming out. Well, after the war, they do send many people. Um, the United States sends many people over to view these concentration camps and see all these things. And then the Nuremberg trials come up, and it's just that's when people actually know. And I will say, Charles speaks out. And even back then, when he finds out what was happening, he speaks out about how horrible Hitler was, how horrible and devastating these things were to the Jewish people. Like, he speaks out against all of these horrible acts, okay? He also speaks out against the United States because during the war, we had put Japanese Americans into, concentration work camps, or, we had taken them from their homes and made them into camps. In fact, there were even camps in Arkansas where I live. So he is speaking out against what we did during the war, what Hitler did during the war. He is showing his displeasure with all that. And he is still very highly speaking out against the Soviets. So he is vehemently against the Russian, vehemently against communism, period. He just thinks that that's horrible, and he speaks out against that. Now, into the 40s and 50s, he does become very involved. He's still consulting, he's flying. He becomes very into conservation, and we're talking conservation in the world. Talking about technologies, and of course, he is very into technology. Obviously, he's very mechanically inclined, but then he also, on the flip side, is talking about being conservative with our technologies and preserving. He's setting up preserves in different countries. He actually ends up officially moving to Hawaii, but he is doing a lot of work in conservation. And Anne, on the flip side, she, of course, they have all these children. She is being with Charles. Still, she is writing books. And during a time period, she actually wrote a book. She does some writing during the time period that Charles is unpopular, and she is equally unpopular. I will say that. Like, they kind of switch gears. Kind of in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. Their popularity and notoriety and fame is still there, and they are asked to speak at different engagements. Like, they are very active with their family, with the country, with touring, with writing. This is what they're doing. They're very active. And now Lindbergh does retire, along with a longtime friend, is Samuel Pryor, who was a Pan Am executive vice president that he and Lindbergh would have worked closely together, but he does retire. But Lindbergh does retire to Hawaii. And of course, again, he's still very much working on his conservation matters. He has a small seaside home located in Maui. Now, in 1972, he does become sick with lymphoma and he passes away in August of 1974, and he is 72 years old. Now, his request, he had actually, along with Samuel, had set up a church there. He wanted to be buried there in kind of a traditional Hawaiian style. That was what he wanted. So he passed away, it's 1972. Anne lives until 2001. Okay, so Anne does not pass away until 2001. Now, after Anne has passed away, some information comes out about Charles and his double life. He had kind of a double life going on in secret. So in the 50s, so this is after World War II going on, he was traveling, he's still traveling the world in different capacities. Now, he goes over to Germany, and in 1957, it's said that he has, quote unquote, lengthy relationships with 3 different women. And of course, he is married. He is married. Anne's not with him on these trips or whatever, but he does have a relationship with a woman called Bridget Hessheimer. It said also has a relationship with her sister, Mariette, and then another woman who acted as his private secretary when he was in Europe, a woman named Valeska. It's stated in all between 1957 and 1967 that he fathered 7 children between these 3 women. It is said that before he died, and remember he died in 74, that he had written to kind of each one of these women, imploring them to maintain the secrecy about these relationships, like keep it quiet like they have. He would maybe visit these women 2 times a year, perhaps. He would always use an alias to meet with these women. So these children never knew who their father was, okay? So he implores them to be quiet. Now, Bridget has a daughter named Astrid who is questioning, like, who is my father? She's looking, and she discovers photographs and love letters from Charles to her mother. She goes to her mother. Her mother tells her everything, but says, please just keep this silent. So after her mom passes away and after Anne passes, so Anne passes in 2001, she, at that time, Astrid, her and her siblings, and she has 2 siblings, so there's 3 kids there, they actually get DNA tests, and it does confirm that Charles is their father. Okay, so they come out in 2003 and put this in the public, and then in 2005 they write a book. Now, to my knowledge, from what I can see, they don't try to go after the Lindbergh estate or anything like that, but they do publish a book. They get it out there. They get the truth out there. Charles still had, children from Anne that are living, and of course his daughter Reeve was born in 45. So Reeve does meet with Astrid. She actually meets the family. She acknowledges, this relationship. She puts it out. She talks about it. And Reeve is an author herself, and she has gone on tours and done interviews and is very interesting, talking about her parents. Of course, once her parents had passed, she would speak on their behalf and answer questions. But she has questioned, everything with her father because everything was a lie that she knew. So, she wondered, did he do all this to protect them, to protect himself? And she, in her quote unquote verbiage, and this is from Reeve, was it to protect them perhaps? To protect himself? Absolutely. So a sad deal here is that everything that very complicated situation with her father is his double life, his secret German children that came out, of course, after her mother's death and all these things. And of course, her mom lived almost 30 years past her father. So is very it's clearly a very complicated situation. And obviously, Charles, remember we talked about how he felt about those barnstormers. Remember that from like part one, talking about how we're womanizing and this and that. He didn't believe in that. He believed that personal relationships needed to be long lasting and intimate and with one person, quote unquote. And then, of course, to find this out about his, double life. And I cannot see that his other German children have done the DNA testing. It just discusses Astrid and her siblings. But yes, so this situation obviously wasn't known until in the last 20 years. For that, I will say in the 1970s and we talked about how because Richard Hauptmann never conceded to being guilty, always conceded to being innocent, that they were killing an innocent man, and onwards and onwards. This, of course, put up a lot of question marks. If anytime someone goes to the death chair proclaiming their innocence, there are going to be certain questions asked. And there were books written, and some articles and some writers came forward even questioning if, Charles himself had anything to do with his children. There's so many outrageous claims talking about how baby Charlie was disabled and that's why he was involved, blah, 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 on and on and on. And I think that's, in my opinion, I will say that is dangerous. I think that there is zero evidence ever claimed that Charles had anything to do with baby Charlie's kidnapping and death. Zero evidence. And I think that's just absolutely, I don't know, disrespectful to even baby Charlie, to the family, to even say, just to maybe sell a book, sell whatever you're trying to do there. I think it's one thing if there was actual evidence that came forward. Like, obviously, Charles was a complicated man. He, at certain times in his life, appeared to be bigoted and racist. And then in other points, he was very into, in fact, not only did he do a lot of conservation work, but he did a lot of tribal work. He was trying to protect tribal lands for different peoples. Like, he showed tons of compassion and love on the flip side of things. Okay, so he obviously was a very complicated man. And then, of course, he showed that he had this amazing family. He had Anne, he had these children, and then, to come to find out that, he had this secret life and that he, sending money to Germany and visiting these German families that he had started in the late 50s, for a about 15-year span, he led a double life. Definitely a complicated man, definitely had his demons and wasn't a perfect man by any means, but there's absolutely zero evidence to say that he had absolutely anything to do with what happened, his firstborn. I will say this. So obviously, with the circumstantial evidence, with the times, you didn't have quote unquote fingerprints. You didn't have, of course, DNA back then. There was a substantial amount of circumstantial evidence. There was enough to convict, to uphold the convictions of Richard, but obviously there was no quote unquote smoking gun, so to speak. There wasn't anything found in Richard's home, like any baby belongings or anything like that, or anything like that. Now, there have been many people look at the case. In fact, I did watch a very interesting documentary where the former and the very famous FBI profiler John Douglas dove into the Lindbergh baby case and looked at it from his perspective. And he went all through the case file. He went to the actual location. It was just very interesting, everything that he did. And I will say, the Lindberghs donated the home to the state of New Jersey, and they kind of used it as like I believe it was used as a children's home or boys' home or rehabilitation center at different points, but they donated the home to the state, like pretty much right away. Like they never lived in the home again. They never kept the home. But John Douglas looks at this case very closely, and he himself concedes that he definitely feels like Richard Hauptmann did it. Now, his only question was, could he have was there someone that helped him? Perhaps. I think that was his biggest question, that he could have had someone. Why did he protect this person? Why didn't he come forward and kind of save himself from being executed? Because he could have if he had produced like an accomplice. So I think that's interesting from my perspective looking at this case, and I'd love to hear from you guys like what you think. But I definitely agree with the state of New Jersey. I don't believe that Richard did have any help. There was nothing. I mean, basically, this man, I believe he wrote the letters. He met with Dr. Condon. He had a ladder. There was no need for anyone else to be involved. Like there was nothing to indicate or signify that anyone was involved. All of the evidence, the bills, Dr. Condon's name written in his home, all of the wood matching the homemade ladder that he made to his attic himself. Like there was nothing to indicate that someone had to help him. I think people just thought, oh, you have an accomplice, but there was nothing indicative of that. And I totally believe that he did work alone. And I do very much think that to protect his family, to protect his wife and his son that he had, I think that he was just stoic. I think he was a liar. I think he was stoic, and he was like, I didn't do this. I'm going to go, I'm going to put it on. I think he was that kind of man, that he wasn't going to ever admit to any wrongdoing. I think he would. And I do agree with the prosecution in the fact that they think that he dropped the baby, because we talked about, I don't know if you guys remember, I think it was in part 1 or part 2 that we discussed, Charlie didn't like strangers. And this is a 20-month-old. He was 30 inches, was it 33 inches long, 30-pound. I mean, he was in a tiny baby. He was a toddler. And I really think that, of course, he was taken when he was asleep. But, again, this baby would have woken up and he would not have been thrilled. He didn't like strangers. This person probably is coming into, wearing a hat, something over his face. Would have been very scary for the baby. I think the baby fought him, and I do believe, suffered the consequences by being either dropped on the way down or to the getaway car or whatever. Like definitely obviously happened like right in that area, and that makes sense understanding the size of this child. I don't know if you've ever had, my baby was very small. I will say my daughter Elle, by that time she would have only weighed maybe all 16, 17 pounds. So I carried her around like nothing, but I do remember picking up children that were her age and like more of a normal quote unquote size. And they were heavy. They were heavy. And especially if they would have been upset or angry, very difficult to handle. This would have been a very difficult thing to get a 30-pound toddler, out of the window when they're sound asleep. They don't like strangers. This is, they are very used to their routine. And then down this homemade wooden ladder. Yeah, this was just not a good idea at all. And obviously Charlie's life was taken because of this terrible decision made by this man that he never knew and intended to do hard work. He just wanted money. He wanted to steal it. And he had relentlessly shown this in his path. Like this was what he did. He stole, definitely. I think they got the right person. And I think he was proud. I think he was stoic. That's in his background, or just, a lot of people will never admit to their wrongdoing. Never, no matter what. So it's interesting. So let me know what you guys think of this case. This case was very, very sad. Very interesting. I didn't know a lot about it, so finding out these tidbits, these details, so very crazy to me. And then I do think it's really sad that I know we have freedom of speech and such, but to make up things about people after they die and with zero evidence, like with the Charles Lindbergh, definitely not a perfect person, definitely flawed person. He did a lot of good and he did a lot of bad, and if we look at that, that's a lot of us. But it's just like to make up that kind of story about him just because this richer person stated on his, deathbed that he was innocent. Again, the state of New Jersey, even former FBI profiler John Douglas believes that he was definitely guilty, and I do too. I concur with them. So, let me know your thoughts on this case. Let me know. This is this is a lot of information, and really didn't want this to be a three-parter, but here we are, guys. So please stay tuned to the upcoming items coming out. So I will be releasing on Friday the 13th just a scary episode. We're going to talk about some scary listener stories, and then I'm also maybe going to do something fun. So Friday the 13th, that's going to be the next episode. I do have a requested episode from a listener coming, and then we're going to dive into the Heaven's Gate cult. We're going to deep dive that. So stay tuned to the upcoming episodes, and please like, follow, share, subscribe, all the things. Let me know what you think of this case. Thank you for listening. Bye.